You have been critical of the policies of the state of Israel, but as we've mentioned, very supportive of Jewish people. You have a lot of friends, rabbis, and Jews in general here in Dallas and across the world. What is the difference to you in that part of the world between politics and religion? So in this case, Zionism and Judaism, both terms broadly defined.
Both terms broadly defined.
So I say that because those terms, there's technical definitions and there's how they're popularly used. And so you have to be kind of, just like we said with Islamophobia, these terms they become politicized. So just generally speaking, I think Zionism has to do with politics, and Judaism has to do with the religion.
It's the great complexity, like to a lot of people, like, wait a minute, right? And you got to take a step back and wonder why there are so many Zionist anti-Semites in America. And there are so many anti-Zionists who are far from being anti-Semites, anti-Zionism, that are opposed to the ideology, that are opposed to the implications of it. Look, I think that it's fundamentally secular. When you think about it, there is an ethno-supremacism. There is, I am the child of Palestinians that were forcibly displaced from their land. I've never been able to go to where my grandparents are from. I've never been able to see that land. I've never been able to access that. I have cousins that I'll never be, well, I shouldn't say never. Inshallah, God willing, I will meet them. But that I've only been able to speak through a phone, FaceTime, Zoom. I think that it's important for us to separate criticism of Israel's policies from anti-Semitism. In fact, it's an injustice. It cheapens anti-Semitism when you throw every person who is opposed to Zionism or opposed to Israel's policies in the bucket of being anti-Semites. It's wrong. It cheapens it. It doesn't do justice to it. And I think it's important for us to have a meaningful conversation about America's support for Israel. Listen, there are terms that are important here. So I'm going to throw out these big terms, right? Apartheid, occupation, ethnic cleansing. These are terms that are legal terms. There are objective thresholds here for apartheid, occupation, ethnic cleansing. The threshold of apartheid has been crossed according to the most respectable human rights organizations in the world. These are the organizations that you will champion and that you will use in every single other conflict to justify your own policies. But that threshold of apartheid has been passed. According to Human Rights Watch, according to Amnesty International, according to the Harvard Law Review, the threshold of apartheid has been crossed. There's a legal terminology there. Two sets of laws for two separate people. You have a displaced people that are forcibly being removed, that are being treated differently, that are stateless, that are undergoing daily humiliation, that live behind an apartheid wall, that live under a different set of policies, that are routinely bombarded, that have lost their ability to free movement, that have lost their ability to access to basic necessities of human life. There are legal definitions here. I don't see how any objective human being can read those reports on apartheid and the threshold crossed for apartheid and walk away from that and say that this is just Jews and Muslims that don't like each other. There's a legal definition here. Occupation. When Israel was created in 1948, you will find many Jews who are opposed to Zionism. And I think this is important, to talk to Jews who are opposed to Zionism, and they are many, that will say that we were told that it was a land without a people for a people without a land. The problem with that was there were people there. Our ancestors, 750,000 Palestinians expelled in the Nakba, and many Palestinians that have been removed and harassed and that are treated in horrific ways. And the occupation is expanding. It is an illegal occupation. The settlements are still expanding. And the United States enables that occupation with its funding, with its unconditional support, unwavering support of Israel. And it does so in a way that completely undermines any of its claims to being a beacon of freedom in the world. Because it is in plain sight now that the world can see what is happening in Sheikh Jarrah, what is happening in Jerusalem, what is happening with these expanding settlements, everything that flies in the face of any claim to wanting a peaceful solution. The children in Gaza, when I talk about dehumanization, the children that were on the face of the New York Times, which is historically one of the most anti-Palestinian newspapers in America, the faces of the children of Gaza. America and many parts of the world are now seeing it. We have been saying for a very long time, this is apartheid. This is an occupation. This is an injustice. The world needs to check it, hold it accountable. South Africa, which experienced apartheid, Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, all of those that fought apartheid in South Africa said that Palestinians are living under apartheid and that the same strategies that checked apartheid in South Africa need to be used to hold Israel accountable for apartheid with the Palestinians. It's impossible for us as Palestinians to simply say that we should give up on this cause because all the odds are stacked against us. But when you have, videos coming out of the Israeli army, spewing skunk water, sewage water on worshipers leaving Al-Aqsa, far-right leaders now taking the government and the so-called only democracy in the Middle East, prohibiting a Palestinian flag being raised anywhere around. American reporters, Shireen Abu Akleh, Palestinian-American Christian reporter, Palestinian-American Christian reporter, one of the most prominent journalists in the Middle East, shot in the face, plain sight. And all the American government could say was, if it turns out that it's indeed Israel, that Israel is responsible for the death of an American journalist, then we will hold them accountable. Nothing. Not a peep. It was a shame to see that happen, and it just solidified to us that whether it's a Democratic president or a Republican president, unfortunately, the support for Israel is enabling it to continue to wipe out the Palestinian population from its historic land. And so we see that happening. And I'll say this as well. People ask me about the Abraham Accords. They say, you are talking about you're talking about peace between communities of faith and protecting communities of faith. Why are you opposed to the Abraham Accords? I think that the name of Abraham should not be used. And I wrote an article called Why I Oppose the Abraham Accords. The name of Abraham should not be used to justify arms deals that only further disenfranchise the abused population of the Palestinians, where, you have quote unquote Muslim regimes making peace with Israel, and that's being used against the Palestinian people who are only further disenfranchised from having a voice in their own fate for the sake of American arms deals and security and economic benefits. It's despicable. It's repulsive. Talk to the people, speak to people on the ground there, see what's happening with your own two eyes, and think about the injustice where our taxpayer dollars are being used to suppress a people in what legally meets the definition by every objective standard of apartheid, of occupation, of ethnic cleansing. And it's ongoing and it's happening in real time, and it's becoming more blatant with a regime now that's unapologetic of even expressing what the policies have already done. And that is the removal of a people, forcible removal of a people, because the government knows that the United States support is unconditional.
Do you have hope that Jews, Muslims, and Christians in this land will live in peace one day together? And with basic respect for each other's humanity?
Look, this isn't a religious conflict. I think that's fundamentally one of the problems.
So even the question is not the correct question?
It's not the correct question. This is not a religious conflict. Yes, religion is invoked. Yes, there are religious elements. But there are many Jews that are opposed to what is happening right now towards the Palestinians. Many. And I would recommend, a serious discussion with even people whose perspectives have grown. Peter Beinart being an example. Rabbi Simon Zimmerman, who started If Not Now. Beit Islam, an Israeli human rights organization that also classed it as apartheid recently. There are many Jews that are opposed to what is happening right now. Palestinians are also not exclusively a Muslim population. Shireen Abu Akleh was Christian. There are many Palestinian Christians that are also being denied entry into their historic churches and that are completely bewildered or absolutely lost in regards to why American evangelicals have this ironclad support for the occupation and have ignored the plight of Palestinian Christians. Of course, I believe Muslims, Christians, and Jews can coexist. Of course, I have hope, because I have to have hope as a person of faith. But as much hope as I have, I think there's a great sense of urgency for people to open their eyes, learn what's actually happening on the ground, read the reports, stop letting these commentators and these companies that are able to generate propaganda own the narrative. There are objective standards here. There are objective measures of oppression that need to be considered here. What's happening to Gaza is one of the greatest atrocities of our time. Learn about it, right? I'd tell people to just watch the Vice documentaries, for example, the mini documentaries. I'd sent them to you as well, Inside the Battle for Jerusalem. I mean, think about it. A guy from Long Island, New York can fly to Israel, right? Fly into Tel Aviv and walk into a home that's been occupied by families for generations and throw the people out under the full protection of the military there and spit on them. Historic homes. And when people come up to me and say, we're opposed to Islamophobia, but they support that, I tell you, you're not opposed to Islamophobia. How can you be opposed to Islamophobia when you traffic in the same framings and dehumanization that enables the viciousness towards Muslims here and Palestinians over there, that they do not deserve to be treated like equal human beings, like full human beings? And that based on historic claims, a guy can fly from New York into a historic neighborhood in Jerusalem and kick out generational families with military guns next to them. What does that sound like? How's that normal, right? And so I think that if people take the time to read, people take the time to investigate, then they come to this conclusion themselves that this is unacceptable. And that you can't put, and this is one of the problems with the framing of Israel-Palestine, is that you're equating occupier and occupied. You're equating the two sides of the conflict. And it's not a conflict, it's an occupation. There is such a disparity of power here that you cannot equate the two sides. You can't, Malcolm X would say, you clip the bird's wing and then fly, and then blame it for not flying as high as you do. You can't do that to a people and just equate them with their occupier. It's an atrocity. It requires us to challenge it. And I'm hopeful at the current movement of Muslims, Christians, and Jews and people of all faiths that are saying enough is enough, that thresholds have been crossed here, that this is an atrocity that cannot continue. This is very personal to me because this is happening now. What I anticipate, and this is what America did, this is what Nelson Mandela actually predicted with the United States. What I anticipate is that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, every American will say, how could we have supported this? And this was terrible. And will pay symbolic, homage to the Palestinian cause. But there are people now that are clinging on for dear life, access to their places of worship, access to their generational homes. Right now, at this there are children that are in detention, and there's a bill in Congress to just stop. I mean, wherever you stand on this issue, child detention should be a red line, right? Congresswoman Betty McCollum has put this bill on the floor of Congress. She can't even get that passed, right? Just to at least censure child detainment by the IDF. So people need to look into this deeper. they need to consider the human element of this and consider the urgency of it as well. With this new regime, it's only going to unfortunately get much worse in the immediate term, and so we have to do something about it.
If I may ask you for some advice for a reason I'll explain maybe in a little bit, or maybe I should just explain now, which is, I think, because you've talked about Islamophobia, because you've been at the center of so many catastrophic events, because you sort of jump into the fire to try to help people, you've been attacked a lot. Just in general, you've been under stress. It's just you're not immune to stress. So a part of me wants to ask just how psychologically difficult it's been and where you draw strength. And would you advise, if the opportunity is there, for a person like me, for a silly kid in a suit, to go to that part of the world and take seriously conversations? I would divide it into two categories. There's leaders and there's people. The leaders are sort of these political entities that have their interests, but they also have power and they want to hold on to power. And then people are just regular people that have families that just want to have basic rights and freedoms and continue to love their families, to pursue different jobs and careers and lives that they can flourish and so on. Those are very kind of different dynamics at play. And if given the opportunity to speak to leaders for me, would you advise I do it or not? And when I say leaders, I mean leaders that would make the case, the pro-Zionist case, and the anti-Zionist case. And in both cases, I would make it a very challenging conversations for both of them. Unlike today, our conversation today, you're an inspiring, incredible person. I'm a huge fan of yours. You spread so much love to the Muslim community here, to the Jewish community. Just everybody loves you. But
not everybody.
Yes, that's true.
Not everybody.
That's true.
But
a lot of people love you. Yes. But this was kind of an inspiring and a positive conversation. It wasn't very challenging. Although we did touch challenging topics, and you did exceptionally well there. But I would do very challenging conversation with those leaders in that part of the world. Is that a bad idea?
All right. Well, let me tell you from now. First and foremost, the first part, because I don't want to lose the first part of your conversation. Is it psychologically stressful? Very, very. But when you're a person of faith and you believe that good work will always be rewarded and that doing the right thing will always be rewarded eventually, you're able to weather that storm quite a bit.
So your wife told you
well, that's the second
was
thing.
Okay, right?
That's the second thing I was going to mention is honestly a supportive family. You know, my dad's 80, man, and he's been through a lot. He was born in 1943, 5 years before Israel was even created. He was born in Palestine. He's suffered displacement. He has been around the world and somehow built himself up to be a distinguished professor of chemistry, an author, an inventor. Grew up taking on some of the most difficult challenges and was just always a man of principle. I always admired my dad being a man of principle. And like, he just tells me, man, stay the course. Don't be afraid. Don't back down. I have a supportive family. I have a supportive wife. I've got supportive kids. So I have amazing people around me that keep me grounded for sure. And ultimately, obviously, faith. And also, I'll say this, slander doesn't stand.
What do you mean by that?
When people slander you, and it kind of comes with the territory of a public figure, it's not going to stand throughout time because eventually any sincere person will find the truth. And the only people that will regurgitate that will continue to do so. So when I get portrayed as an anti-Semite because of my strong takes on Israel and challenging Israel, and I will continue to do so, it takes just people in doubt. Like, we know him. What are you talking about? So slander doesn't stand, at least with the people that are important to you. It might reside on the internet. It might have great rankings and social media bots that give it traction.
But
But
is that
ultimately,
psychologically difficult to
of
you to have
course,
that?
yes, it is difficult. It's very difficult, and it's hurtful, especially when it comes from quarters that you would hope that it doesn't come from. But, you take a step back, you reevaluate, you lean into your faith, and you lean on the people that are closest to you, and then you keep going. You learn the lessons. Could I be doing something better? Could I be doing something different? Could I be saying something better? Could I be saying something different? Are the noble causes that I want to achieve, am I doing justice by those causes? How do I grow out of this, right? You become wiser through these things as well. The second part of your question, though, about what you should do, if you're going to talk to people from a place of inquiry. I would say talk to people more so than leaders, and especially some of those who have been erased from the media commentary. Benjamin Netanyahu gets a lot of airtime, here in the United States. He's well-spoken. He speaks perfect English. He's an American as well. I would challenge him, on some of the things that he has said and done. He has an ongoing corruption case. I think that I think he's a fascist. I think that he's a person who has done much evil. I think that he has a lot of blood on his hands, and I think that one day he will be prosecuted for that. But I'd say talk to people on the ground and people that have been erased. Talk to the families that are being displaced. Sheikh Jarrah, I don't care about the political leadership. I'd much rather you talk to the people on the ground in East Jerusalem that have been displaced. The families. Talk to Palestinian Christians. Talk to the sister of Shireen Abu Akla, Lina Abu Akla, who was extremely disappointed and let down when Joe Biden went to the region and did not take her calls, did not meet her, which was an absolutely disgraceful move. He should have met with her. She's the sister of an American journalist who was murdered in cold blood. Talk to Lina Abu Akla. Talk to Mitri Rahib. Mitri, interesting person, for example. He's a Lutheran. He's the head of the Lutheran Church in Palestine. He comes to Dallas sometimes and talks about the plight of Palestinian Christians. I think if you're talking to people in leadership, obviously there are some that will be able to represent themselves in English. Hanan Ashrawi is a very eloquent person, for example. I don't know if you're going to have any luck getting into Gaza, but I'll pray for you if you do. But obviously, if you want to talk to everybody, you got to talk to everybody, man. So,
well, and I also want to say this is very important when you say whitewashing, because I've heard this a lot. So also with Ukraine and Russia, there's an interesting line between whitewashing, which is something you definitely should not do, and a deep empathy for a large number of human beings. It's a really tricky line to walk. And I also disagree with you about, I think, I don't know if it's a disagreement, but I think I disagree about leaders. I think I agree 100% that the most important people are the people on the ground.
Okay.
But I think those are extremely important people to understand, not just as leaders, but as human beings too. And in many cases, to have a challenging conversation, but from a place of empathy, from understanding a human being.
So if you plan to talk to right-wing, the current leadership of Israel, my only request to you is talk to the victims themselves, not the Palestinian Authority. Talk to the victim. I know you want to, right? So I appreciate
the victims.
that.
Yes, the victims.
Talk to the victims
100%.
themselves. Talk to those people that are being thrown out of their homes and subjected to the daily humiliation. Go to a checkpoint and walk through the checkpoint the way that a Palestinian walks through a checkpoint, and tell me that's not apartheid. Walk through that checkpoint, crammed in cages, and tell me it's not apartheid. So I think you're a very sincere person. I think you're gonna do your best. I'll be praying for you.
Some of these things are harder than others, but yes, I feel like we're in the middle of a negotiation, and we've come to a point where we both agree.
Everyone deserves to be. Not everyone deserves to be, but I think there's great value and benefit. Let me say I agree with you in hearing people, even tyrants, hearing them so that you can properly deconstruct and decipher what you're hearing. But just think of the voices that don't get heard. And a lot of times what's been done to the Muslim world is, and what's being done right now in the name of the Abraham Accords, what's wrong with the Palestinians? The other Arabs are making peace with them. Let me tell you something. Those regimes that are signing on to the Abraham Accords, the people are not happy, but they're terrified of challenging those regimes. So if you go talk to the leaders of some of these countries that have signed on to the Abraham Accords and that are, in some twisted way, making this about religion and peace, you can greatly skew the narrative to where Palestinians are just an inherently disagreeable people that don't want peace. They just want to live in their homes. They just want to live as full, equal human beings. They want the things that everybody wants. And they're only being further disenfranchised in the name of peace now, because voices are being amplified in the name of peace that are suffocating voices for justice.